The conference room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the soft clicking of keyboards. Jett Hawthorne sat at the head of the mahogany table, his steel-gray eyes scanning the quarterly reports spread before him. At 34, he had built Hawthorne Construction from a one-man operation into a regional powerhouse with 47 employees and projects spanning 3 states. His calloused hands, still bearing the evidence of his early days swinging hammers, now signed contracts worth millions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on him that while he could orchestrate the construction of shopping centers and office complexes, coordinate dozens of subcontractors, and navigate complex municipal regulations, he couldn't seem to build a bridge across the growing chasm in his own marriage. The foundation he thought he had laid with Miranda was cracking, and no amount of concrete could fix what was breaking between them. Miranda Hawthorne stood in their granite kitchen, her manicured fingers dancing across her phone screen with the practiced precision of a concert pianist. The device had become an extension of her hand over the past 6 months, ever since she had discovered the lifestyle blog that would change everything. She scrolled through perfectly curated photos of couples in matching workout gear, vacation snapshots from European getaways, and motivational quotes about leveling up your relationship. Jett walked through the front door at exactly 6:15, as he had every weekday for the past 3 years. His work boots left no trace on the pristine hardwood floors thanks to the mat system Miranda had installed after reading an article about intentional living spaces. The scent of his cologne, mixed with sawdust and diesel fuel, created a familiar cloud that once made her heart skip. Now it simply reminded her of everything she felt was missing. "How is the Riverside project?" Miranda asked, without looking up from her phone, her voice carrying the mechanical quality of someone reciting lines from a script they had performed too many times. Jett loosened his tie, the navy silk sliding through his fingers like water. Foundation inspection passed. We're ahead of schedule. He paused at the kitchen island, studying his wife's profile. The soft light from her phone screen cast shadows across features he had once memorized in moonlight. "How was your day?" Miranda finally glanced up, her emerald eyes bright with the kind of excitement that used to be reserved for surprise dinner reservations or unexpected gifts. "I've been reading about relationship optimization. Did you know that successful couples have weekly strategic planning sessions?" The phrase hit Jett like a dropped wrench. Strategic planning sessions. He ran multi-million-dollar construction projects that required months of strategic planning, but the idea of applying corporate methodology to his marriage felt like trying to blueprint love itself. Strategic planning for what exactly? For us, for our future, for making sure we're both growing in the same direction. Miranda's words tumbled out with the rehearsed quality of someone who had spent considerable time crafting them. She turned her phone toward him, revealing a blog post titled 10 Signs Your Relationship Needs a Strategic Overhaul. The author's bio photo showed a woman with impossibly white teeth and the kind of airbrushed perfection that existed only in digital spaces. Jett read the first few bullet points over Miranda's shoulder. Regular relationship audits, monthly goal alignment sessions, implementing accountability partnerships. The language felt cold, clinical, like instructions for assembling furniture rather than nurturing a marriage. Since when do we need to audit our relationship? Since we want to make sure we're not just coasting. Miranda's voice carried a note of defensiveness that hadn't been there moments before. Bethany says that's what kills marriages, complacency. Bethany. The name landed between them like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread far beyond its initial impact. Bethany Chen had entered Miranda's life through a wellness workshop 6 months ago, and since then her influence had grown like ivy on a wall, beautiful at first glance but gradually choking out everything else. Jett had met Bethany exactly twice. The first time was at a coffee shop where Miranda had arranged what she called a casual introduction. Bethany had arrived with a leather portfolio, business cards, and a smile that felt calculated down to the degree of lip curvature. She spoke in bullet points about maximizing relationship potential and creating synergistic growth patterns, while Jett wondered if she was selling life coaching or proposing a merger. The second encounter had been at a dinner party hosted by Miranda's college friend Sarah. Bethany had monopolized the conversation with stories about her clients' transformations, each anecdote more dramatic than the last. She spoke of couples who had revolutionized their communication protocols and implemented strategic intimacy frameworks, until Jett felt like he was listening to someone describe marriage as if it were a software update. "What specifically does Bethany think we need to fix?" Jett asked, settling onto the bar stool across from Miranda. The granite countertop felt cool against his forearms, grounding him in something solid while the conversation drifted into increasingly abstract territory. Miranda's phone buzzed with a notification, and Jett watched her eyes flick toward the screen before returning to his face. The micro-gesture lasted perhaps a quarter of a second, but it contained multitudes. In that brief moment, he saw where her attention truly resided, and it wasn't with him. "It's not about fixing," Miranda said, her fingers unconsciously moving toward her phone before she caught herself and folded her hands in her lap. "It's about optimizing. We have a good foundation, but we could have a great one." Bethany showed me examples of couples who tracked their progress and achieved incredible results. Tracked their progress how? Weekly check-ins, monthly relationship reviews, setting quarterly goals for emotional intimacy, financial growth, and personal development. Miranda's voice gained momentum as she spoke, like a train leaving the station. We could create metrics for measuring our happiness levels, communication effectiveness, and shared experiences. Jett felt something cold settle in his chest. In his professional life, metrics made sense. Square footage, material costs, timeline milestones, safety records. These were concrete elements that could be measured, adjusted, and improved. But the idea of quantifying love, of reducing the spontaneous magic of their relationship to data points and performance indicators, felt like trying to capture sunlight in a spreadsheet. "Are you unhappy with us?" The question emerged quieter than he had intended, carrying the weight of genuine concern rather than defensive challenge. Miranda's expression softened, and for a moment Jett glimpsed the woman he had married 4 years ago, in the garden behind her parents' Victorian home. She had worn wildflowers in her hair that day, and when she laughed during their first dance, the sound had been pure music. Now she seemed to be reading from an invisible script, her responses filtered through layers of external influence. "I'm not unhappy," she said carefully. "I just think we could be happier, more intentional." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. More aligned with our potential. The phrase, "aligned with our potential," sounded foreign in Miranda's voice, like words borrowed from someone else's vocabulary. Jett recognized the linguistic fingerprints of Bethany's influence, the way certain phrases had begun appearing in Miranda's speech like transplanted organs that hadn't quite taken root. "What would these check-ins look like?" Jett asked, though part of him already suspected the answer would involve more of Bethany's methodology. Miranda's eyes lit up as she reached for her phone, swiping through screenshots she had saved. "Bethany has a whole framework. We'd rate different aspects of our relationship on a scale of 1 to 10, discuss areas for improvement, set action items for the following week, and track our progress over time." She showed him a template that looked remarkably similar to the project management software he used for construction jobs. Relationship satisfaction score, communication effectiveness rating, intimacy index, financial harmony metric. Each category had subcategories, and each subcategory had specific criteria for evaluation. "This looks like a performance review," Jett said, studying the screen with the same attention he gave architectural blueprints. "That's the point. You review your projects to make them better, right? Why wouldn't we do the same for our marriage?" The logic was sound in theory, but something fundamental felt wrong about the application. His construction projects had clear objectives, definable endpoints, and measurable outcomes. But love wasn't a building to be constructed according to specifications. It was more like a garden, requiring patience, intuition, and the wisdom to know when to nurture and when to simply let things grow. "How often would we do these reviews?" Jett asked. "Weekly 1-hour sessions, with monthly deep dives and quarterly goal-setting meetings." Miranda scrolled through more screenshots, showing him calendars color-coded by relationship activities, charts tracking emotional temperature over time, and what appeared to be a point system for romantic gestures. And Bethany developed all of this? She's helped dozens of couples transform their relationships. Some of them went from considering divorce to being featured in lifestyle magazines as relationship goals. Miranda's voice carried the breathless quality of someone sharing incredible news. She has case studies, testimonials, before and after photos of couples at events. Jett felt a familiar sensation, the same internal alarm that sounded when he encountered contractors who promised unrealistic timelines or materials that seemed too good to be true. His years in construction had taught him to recognize the difference between genuine expertise and polished marketing. The industry was full of smooth talkers who could present beautiful proposals while lacking the fundamental skills to deliver quality work. "Has Bethany ever been married?" Jett asked. The question seemed to catch Miranda off guard. She paused in her scrolling, her thumb hovering over the screen like a hummingbird uncertain where to land. "I don't think that's relevant. She's a certified relationship coach with advanced training in couples therapy techniques." "That doesn't answer my question." "She's currently focusing on her career and personal growth. She says marriage is just one path to fulfillment, and she wants to help others optimize theirs before she makes that choice for herself." Jett absorbed this information slowly, the way he might study soil composition reports before breaking ground on a new foundation. The woman who was providing strategic guidance for their marriage had never actually built one herself. It was like taking architectural advice from someone who had studied blueprints but never held a hammer. "Don't you think it's worth trying?" Miranda asked, her voice carrying a note of pleading that made Jett's chest tighten. "What if we could be one of those couples who other people look at and think, 'That's what I want'?" The question revealed something that Jett hadn't fully recognized until that moment. Miranda wasn't just seeking improvement in their relationship, she was seeking external validation. She wanted their marriage to become a showcase, a demonstration of successful optimization that others would admire and emulate. The realization settled over him like dust after a demolition, covering everything in a fine layer of sadness. "I thought we already had what other people wanted," Jett said quietly. Miranda's expression flickered, and for a moment her carefully constructed enthusiasm wavered. "We do. I mean, we're good, but good isn't enough anymore. Everyone's raising their standards. Everyone's becoming more intentional about their choices." "Everyone like who?" "Like the couples in Bethany's success stories. Like the people who don't just settle for adequate when they could have extraordinary." The word "settle" hung between them like smoke from a small fire that might grow larger if not carefully tended. Jett had never considered their marriage settled. They owned a beautiful home in an exclusive neighborhood, traveled twice a year to destinations that required passport stamps, and had built a life together that included inside jokes, shared dreams, and the kind of comfortable intimacy that comes from truly knowing another person. But perhaps comfort itself had become the problem. "What happens if we try this system and discover we're not compatible with optimization?" Jett asked. Miranda's phone buzzed again, and this time she didn't resist the urge to glance at it. The notification showed a message from someone named Bethany C., with a preview that read, "Just checking in on." The rest was cut off, but the timing felt less than coincidental. "That won't happen," Miranda said, her attention split between Jett and whatever Bethany had written. "The system is designed to enhance what's already there, not replace it." But Jett wasn't convinced that enhancement and replacement were mutually exclusive. In construction, renovation often began with the intention of preserving a structure's character while making improvements. However, the process frequently revealed that the original foundation was incompatible with the desired changes. Sometimes what started as enhancement became complete reconstruction, and the building that emerged bore no resemblance to what had stood before. "I need to think about this," Jett said, standing from the bar stool and stretching muscles that had grown tight during their conversation. Miranda looked up from her phone, her expression mixing disappointment with determination. "Bethany says that resistance to growth is often fear disguised as rationality." The quote sounded polished, rehearsed, like something that had been tested in multiple conversations before being deployed in their kitchen. Jett wondered how many other husbands had heard those exact words, delivered with the same confident authority that brooked no argument. "Maybe," Jett said, "or maybe some things don't need to be optimized to be perfect." He left Miranda in the kitchen with her phone and her screenshots, climbing the stairs to their bedroom where everything remained as it had been that morning. The bed was made with hospital corners, the pillows arranged with mathematical precision, and not a single item was out of place. The room looked like a photograph from a home design magazine, beautiful and flawless, and somehow devoid of the messy vitality that made a space feel lived in. Jett sat on the edge of the bed and removed his work boots, setting them precisely in the spot where they belonged according to Miranda's organizational system. Everything in their life had a designated place, a specific function, a measurable purpose. But he was beginning to wonder if somewhere in all that optimization they had misplaced the very thing they were trying to improve. Outside their bedroom window, the sun was setting behind the trees that lined their property, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Jett watched the light fade gradually, naturally, without metrics or improvement protocols or strategic planning sessions. The sunset was perfect not because it had been optimized, but because it simply existed, beautiful in its ephemeral, unmeasurable way. Downstairs, he could hear Miranda on the phone, her voice animated in a way it hadn't been during their conversation. She was talking to someone about frameworks and implementation strategies, about resistance patterns and breakthrough moments. The words drifted up through the floorboards like smoke, filling the spaces between what was said and what was meant. Jett closed his eyes and tried to remember the last time they had simply talked without agenda, without purpose, without the goal of improving anything at all. The memory felt distant, like trying to recall the details of a dream after waking. Perhaps that was what needed optimization after all, not their relationship, but their ability to exist within it without constantly measuring its value against some external standard. But as he listened to Miranda's voice below, animated by the prospect of systematic improvement, Jett suspected that this conversation was far from over. In fact, it was probably just beginning, and the direction it took would determine whether they were building something stronger together or preparing to demolish what they had built to make room for something entirely different. The distinction between enhancement and replacement was becoming more important by the hour, and Jett was beginning to understand that the choice might not be entirely his to make. Miranda had already begun the planning phase, gathering her materials and assembling her team. The question now was whether he would pick up a hammer and help with the construction, or whether he would find himself standing in the rubble of something that had been perfectly functional before anyone decided it needed to be improved. The following Tuesday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Jett grateful for his work outdoors. He was reviewing structural plans for a new medical complex when his phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. "Bethany wants to meet with both of us Thursday evening. She has some ideas about our implementation strategy." Implementation strategy. The phrase felt like corporate jargon applied to something that should have been organic, natural, evolving. Jett set his phone aside and returned to the blueprints, but the mathematical precision of the architectural drawings reminded him uncomfortably of the relationship metrics Miranda had shown him. Thursday evening came faster than he would have preferred. Bethany arrived at their home carrying a leather portfolio that looked expensive enough to fund a small renovation project. She wore a cream-colored blazer over dark jeans, her auburn hair swept into the kind of effortless updo that probably required considerable effort to achieve. Her smile was warm but calculated, like the lobby of an upscale hotel designed to make guests feel welcome while subtly communicating their place in the hierarchy. "Jett, thank you for making time for this," Bethany said, extending her hand with the firm grip of someone who had practiced the gesture until it conveyed exactly the right balance of confidence and approachability. "Miranda has told me so much about your success with Hawthorne Construction. I love working with high achievers who understand the value of systematic approaches." They settled in the living room, Miranda perched on the edge of the sofa with the eager attention of a student preparing for an important exam. Bethany arranged her materials on the coffee table with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. Charts, worksheets, assessment forms, and what appeared to be a contract all emerged from her portfolio in carefully planned order. "Before we dive into the specifics," Bethany began, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to presenting to audiences, "I want to establish our shared objective. We're here because you both recognize that good isn't enough when extraordinary is achievable. You've built something solid together, but solid can become stagnant without intentional growth strategies." Jett noticed how she spoke as if their desire for her services was a foregone conclusion, as if the question wasn't whether they needed optimization, but merely how quickly they could implement it. The technique reminded him of high-pressure sales tactics he had encountered from equipment vendors, the way they framed reluctance as a personal failing rather than legitimate hesitation. "Miranda mentioned that you have some concerns about our approach," Bethany continued, turning her attention directly to Jett. "I appreciate skepticism. It shows you're someone who doesn't make decisions lightly. But I'd like to share some data that might help address your reservations." She produced a tablet and swipes to a presentation filled with charts, graphs, and before and after photos of couples. The slides looked professionally designed, complete with branded color schemes and carefully selected testimonials. Each success story followed a similar pattern: couple experiencing relationship plateau, introduction of optimization protocols, dramatic improvement in measurable outcomes. "These are actual clients," Bethany explained, narrating each slide with the enthusiasm of someone unveiling a revolutionary product. "David and Sarah increased their relationship satisfaction scores by 43% in 6 months. Michael and Jennifer went from considering separation to renewing their vows after implementing our communication enhancement protocols. The data speaks for itself." Jett studied the presentation with the same analytical approach he brought to project proposals. The charts were impressive, the testimonials glowing, the photographic evidence compelling. But something felt manufactured about the entire package, too polished, too convenient. Real life rarely produced such clean narratives or such consistently positive outcomes. "What happens to couples who don't see these kinds of results?" Jett asked. The question seemed to catch Bethany slightly off guard. Her smile flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself with renewed intensity. "That's extremely rare when both partners fully commit to the process. The few cases where we've seen limited progress usually involve one person who wasn't ready to embrace change." The implication was clear. Failure was always the fault of insufficient commitment rather than flawed methodology. It was a clever way to insulate the system from criticism while placing responsibility entirely on the participants. Jett had seen similar approaches from contractors who blamed project delays on client interference rather than poor planning. "What does full commitment look like?" Jett asked. Bethany launched into a detailed explanation of what she called the transformation protocol: weekly coaching sessions via video call, daily progress tracking using a specialized app, monthly in-person intensive workshops, quarterly retreats with other couples in the program. The time commitment alone was staggering, requiring approximately 10 hours per week dedicated to relationship optimization activities. "I travel frequently for work," Jett said. "Sometimes I'm on job sites in other states for weeks at a time. How would that work with this schedule?" "That's actually perfect," Bethany replied without missing a beat. "Distance can be an excellent catalyst for implementing our long-distance relationship enhancement strategies. We have modules specifically designed for couples who face geographic challenges." Miranda leaned forward eagerly. She showed me some amazing techniques for maintaining connection across distance, video date protocols, synchronized activity frameworks, virtual intimacy exercises. Virtual intimacy exercises. The phrase made Jett feel like he was listening to someone describe love as if it were a software application that could be updated with new features. He had spent weeks away from Miranda on various projects over the years, and they had always found their own ways to stay connected. Phone calls that lasted until one of them fell asleep, surprise deliveries of her favorite coffee to her office, photos of job site sunrises that reminded him of mornings they had watched the light change from their bedroom window. These moments had felt natural, spontaneous, real. The idea of systematizing them felt like trying to choreograph breathing. "What's the investment?" Jett asked, using the business terminology he suspected Bethany would appreciate. "I prefer to think of it as an investment in your future rather than a cost," Bethany said, sliding a pricing sheet across the coffee table. "The complete program is $12,000 for 6 months, with additional modules available for ongoing optimization." $12,000. Jett tried to maintain his expression while processing the figure. He had paid less than that for the kitchen renovation that Miranda had insisted would transform their daily routines. The amount wasn't prohibitive for their household budget, but the idea of spending that much money to learn how to love his wife felt fundamentally wrong. "That seems like a significant amount," Jett said carefully. "Consider it in context," Bethany replied. "The average cost of a divorce is over $15,000, not including the emotional trauma and lifestyle disruption. For less than the price of a legal separation, you're investing in creating the relationship of your dreams." The logic was sound in a cold, calculating way, but it felt like emotional blackmail disguised as financial wisdom. Bethany was essentially arguing that the cost of not hiring her was divorce, as if those were the only two options available to them. It was a false dichotomy that eliminated the possibility that they might be fine as they were, or that they might improve their relationship through their own efforts. Miranda reached for Jett's hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that once would have felt natural, but now seemed calculated for Bethany's benefit. "What if this is exactly what we need? What if 6 months from now we're one of those success stories she showed us? And what if 6 months from now we've spent $12,000 to learn that we were fine to begin with?" Jett replied, though he kept his voice gentle to avoid seeming dismissive of Miranda's hopes. "That's fear talking," Bethany interjected smoothly. "Fear of growth, fear of change, fear of discovering your true potential as a couple. I see this resistance pattern frequently, especially with men who have achieved success in traditional fields. You're accustomed to being the expert, the decision maker, the one with the answers. Surrendering control and accepting guidance can feel threatening to that identity." The analysis was delivered with such confident authority that it almost sounded reasonable. But Jett recognized the technique as a form of psychological manipulation, reframing his legitimate concerns as character flaws that needed to be overcome. It was like being told that questioning a contractor's inflated estimate revealed a fear of home improvement rather than sensible financial caution. "I'm not afraid of growth," Jett said. "I'm cautious about unnecessary intervention in something that's working." "But is it really working at its full potential?" Bethany asked, her tone shifting to something that sounded almost therapeutic. "Miranda came to me because she felt something was missing. That feeling doesn't emerge from relationships that are truly optimized." The statement hit its target. Jett felt a familiar twist in his chest, the same sensation he experienced when a building inspector pointed out a code violation he had missed. If Miranda felt something was missing, then perhaps he had been blind to problems that were obvious to everyone else. Perhaps his satisfaction with their relationship was actually complacency disguised as contentment. "What specifically do you feel is missing?" Jett asked Miranda directly, temporarily ignoring Bethany's presence. Miranda glanced between her husband and her coach as if seeking permission to speak freely. "It's not that anything's wrong exactly. It's just that I see other couples who seem more intentional, more connected, more aligned with their shared vision. We go through our routines, but when's the last time we really talked about our dreams for the future?" The question was fair, and Jett had to admit that their recent conversations had focused primarily on logistics, project schedules, dinner plans, weekend errands, holiday arrangements with their families. They had fallen into the comfortable rhythm of an established partnership, but perhaps comfortable had become another word for stagnant. "We could talk about our dreams without hiring a consultant," Jett said. "We could," Miranda agreed, "but we don't. We say we will, but then life gets busy and it never happens. Having structure ensures that it actually occurs." Bethany nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Most couples have good intentions, but intentions without systems rarely produce lasting change. That's why our program includes accountability mechanisms and progress tracking. It's not enough to want improvement, you need frameworks that guarantee implementation." The word guarantee caught Jett's attention. In construction, guarantees were serious commitments backed by insurance policies and legal contracts. They represented confidence in both materials and workmanship. But human relationships weren't construction projects with predictable timelines and measurable outcomes. They were living systems that evolved organically, responding to countless variables that couldn't be controlled or systematized. "What happens if we try this and decide it's not working for us?" "The program includes a satisfaction guarantee," Bethany replied, producing another document from her portfolio. "If you're not completely satisfied with your progress after 60 days, we'll refund 50% of your investment." 50%? Not the full amount, not even 75%, but exactly half. The policy was designed to sound generous while ensuring that Bethany kept a substantial portion of the fee regardless of outcomes. It was like a contractor who guaranteed their work but charged a 50% restocking fee for unused materials. Miranda squeezed Jett's hand. "What do we have to lose? If it works, we'll be happier than we've ever been. If it doesn't, we're only out $6,000, and at least we'll know we tried everything." Only $6,000! The phrase revealed how thoroughly Bethany had reframed the discussion. What had started as a $12,000 program was now presented as a $6,000 risk, as if the guaranteed loss was somehow more palatable than the theoretical investment. It was a masterful example of anchoring bias, making the lesser amount seem reasonable by comparison to the greater one. "I need to think about this," Jett said, releasing Miranda's hand and standing from the sofa. "This is a significant decision that shouldn't be made impulsively." Bethany's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, though I should mention that I only accept a limited number of couples each quarter, and I currently have a waiting list. If you decide to move forward, sooner would be better than later in terms of availability." The artificial scarcity felt like the final piece of a carefully constructed sales presentation. Create urgency, limit options, frame hesitation as a character flaw, and always close with the suggestion that delay might result in missing out entirely. Jett had encountered similar tactics from subcontractors who claimed to have limited availability while simultaneously advertising for new clients. "We'll discuss it and get back to you," Jett said, extending his hand to signal the end of the meeting. Bethany gathered her materials with the efficient movements of someone who had performed this routine many times before. "I'll email you some additional resources that might help with your decision-making process. Sometimes seeing the research behind our methods helps analytical minds feel more comfortable with the investment." After Bethany left, Jett and Miranda sat in their living room surrounded by the lingering scent of expensive perfume and the weight of unspoken expectations. The coffee table still bore the impressions of where Bethany's materials had been arranged, like evidence of a crime scene that had been hastily cleaned up. "She's impressive," Miranda said, breaking the silence that had settled between them like dust after a windstorm. "She's polished," Jett replied. "There's a difference." "You didn't like her?" "I didn't trust her," Jett corrected. "She's selling something, and she's very good at it. But being good at sales doesn't necessarily mean being good at what you're selling." Miranda's expression shifted, disappointment clouding features that had been bright with possibility just moments before. "You've already decided against it." "I've decided to be careful. $12,000 is real money, but more importantly, this is our marriage we're talking about. If we're going to make changes, shouldn't they come from us rather than from someone who's known us for 2 hours? "But that's exactly the point," Miranda said, her voice gaining intensity. We've known each other for 8 years, and we're stuck in patterns. Sometimes you need an outside perspective to see what you can't see from the inside." The argument had merit, and Jett found himself considering it seriously. Perhaps they had become too comfortable, too settled in routines that felt natural but might actually be limiting their growth. Perhaps Miranda's dissatisfaction was a signal that something genuinely needed attention, and his resistance was simply an unwillingness to acknowledge problems he preferred to ignore. "What if we tried working on things ourselves first?" Jett suggested. "Set aside time each week to talk about what's working and what isn't. See if we can identify areas we want to improve without spending $12,000 on someone else's system." Miranda considered this for a moment, and Jett felt a flicker of hope that they might find their own path forward. But then she shook her head with the frustrated expression of someone who had already explored all the obvious solutions. "We've said we'd do that before, and it never lasts more than a few weeks. Life gets busy, or we get comfortable, or we convince ourselves that everything's fine when maybe it's just adequate." She paused, studying his face with the intensity of someone trying to read a map in fading light. "Don't you want us to be extraordinary instead of just adequate?" The question hung between them like a bridge that might lead to understanding or might collapse under the weight of unrecognized assumptions. Jett realized that somewhere in their 8 years together, Miranda had developed a definition of extraordinary that required external validation and systematic improvement. Her vision of an exceptional marriage looked like something that could be photographed, measured, and compared to other couples' achievements. But Jett's definition of extraordinary was different. It lived in quiet moments when Miranda laughed at something only he would find funny. It existed in the way she absently reached for his hand while they watched movies, or how she knew exactly how he liked his coffee prepared on Sunday mornings. Extraordinary wasn't a performance or a project. It was the accumulation of small intimacies that couldn't be systematized or optimized because they emerged naturally from genuine connection. "I think we're already extraordinary," Jett said quietly, "but maybe we define that word differently." Miranda's eyes filled with tears that she blinked away quickly, as if crying might be seen as a failure of emotional optimization. "I love you, Jett. I love us. But I look at other couples who seem so intentional, so connected, so aligned with their shared vision, and I wonder if we're settling for good enough when we could have something amazing." "And I look at us and think we already have something amazing," Jett replied. "Maybe not according to someone else's metrics, but amazing in ways that matter to me." The conversation continued for another hour, circling around the same fundamental disagreement like water spiraling down a drain. Miranda saw potential that required professional intervention to realize. Jett saw value that might be damaged by unnecessary modification. Both perspectives were reasonable, both were motivated by love, and both were completely incompatible. Finally, they agreed to table the decision for a week. Miranda would research Bethany's credentials and track record more thoroughly. Jett would honestly consider whether his resistance came from legitimate concerns or simple reluctance to change. They would reconvene the following Thursday with whatever information and insights they had gathered. But as they prepared for bed that night, Jett noticed that Miranda spent an unusual amount of time on her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be testimonials and success stories. The blue light from her screen created a barrier between them that felt symbolic of something larger. They were lying in the same bed, but they were no longer looking in the same direction. Jett stared at the ceiling and wondered when their marriage had become something that needed to be fixed rather than something to be enjoyed. He tried to remember the last time they had simply been together, without agenda, without purpose, without the goal of improving or optimizing or enhancing anything. The memory felt distant, like trying to recall the details of a house he had demolished to make way for new construction. Perhaps that was the real problem. Perhaps they had been so busy maintaining their relationship that they had forgotten how to simply live within it. Perhaps the solution wasn't more systems and protocols and measurement tools, but rather the courage to stop measuring altogether and trust that love is its own reward. But as he listened to Miranda's breathing settle into the rhythm of sleep, Jett suspected that this was only the beginning of a much longer conversation. The foundation of their marriage was about to be tested, and he wasn't entirely certain it was strong enough to support the weight of transformation that someone else had designed.